Hello and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host Rob. In today's video I wanted to look at some campaign ideas that I've been thinking about. One of these I actually stole from another channel though. Their name was Enter the Dungeon, so let's give them credit before we do anything else. But most of these are either my own ideas or things I've had other game masters run in the past and really like their stuff. A lot of these ideas are inspired by other sources as well, of course, because, you know, that's the kind of person I am. I steal things from other people and reappropriate it for my own campaigns. No secret. I've talked about that 100 times before. Anyways, so let's just get right into it. Idea number one. Realms are torn apart and there's like chaos everywhere. This is kind of the Game of Thrones idea, right? The Game of Thrones, king dies, 5 different people all claim the throne for themselves. Succession isn't very clear. You end up with this 5-sided civil war. But meanwhile, you also have the return of the undead. And so that's kind of the thing I wanted to talk about here, is the idea you have a bunch of different warring factions, but people are overlooking the greater threat. Maybe the players start out at low level, they're dealing with, you know, they're out in some fringe town in the middle of nowhere, and they have to deal with like things like bandits and stuff. But then they start hearing rumors about these bigger problems going on, and then as they start to get more and more powerful, they start to become aware of what's really happening. Now, maybe you go the Game of Thrones route and you use a bunch of ice undead, or maybe you use, you know, demons, devils, elementals, whatever else you want. I think you can take that kind of basic idea, sort of throw the kingdom, so to speak, into turmoil, have a bunch of different warring factions, and that alone creates a very interesting world for your players to play in. You have different political opportunities. The players might decide that they like one of the kings and want to help that king become the ruler. They might decide that they want to become the ruler. I mean, if there's no clear succession, who's to stop them, kind of thing, especially as they start getting to higher and higher level. You know, maybe they understand that the real problem is whatever the bigger threat is, the undead, the chaos, the demons, devils, elementals, whatever the case is, right? And so they decide, forget all the squabbling kings and lords, we need to deal with the real issue. And I think that makes an interesting campaign setting and a good basic place to start with and kind of give your players lots of opportunities to go. You also have the idea that maybe different monsters are getting displaced from their natural habitat by whatever the bigger threat is, and that now players have to deal with some of those things just by virtue of them being like chased out, right? And then that can also help to drop hints that there's something bigger behind all this. Why are all these things being displaced? Why are these orcs suddenly like all fleeing and stuff, right? Well, it turns out that there's some bigger threat up in the, north or the south or the east or the west or whatever, We don't have to steal everything from Game of Thrones. We can try to pretend we're a little original here. But yeah, that's the basic idea there. Setting number 2. I'm just going to call this one the Terminator storyline. Basically, I was kind of thinking of like a steampunk version of like what we all wanted from Terminator. I mean, Terminator 1 was great. Terminator 2 was, in my opinion, even better. Sarah Connor Chronicles with Summer Glau. They had a certain charm, besides just Summer Glau. She has her own charm. But I actually like that show quite a bit as well. But the fact is, let's be honest, what did we all really want to see from the Terminator franchise that we've never really gotten, except for kind of in one movie, sort of, starring Christian Bale, which was okay. The actual war against the machines, So, I think something like that can be kind of fun. The players maybe discover that there's like these weird ancient artifact machine type things that are functioning in some other area. Maybe one of the players themselves is an artificer or a warforged or something along those lines. I think that could be kind of an interesting connection. And then the players have to fight progressively more and more powerful killer robot type of things as they progress, only to learn that maybe there's some sort of like giant monster machine behind it, or maybe some sort of like steampunk AI, or maybe it's just some crazy inventor trying to take over the world. Who knows? But I think you could do some interesting stuff with that. You can also take that in interesting directions as well. I've talked about this before, but in my Endless Realms campaign that I ran for my players, at one point, one of the alternate Earth worlds that they went to, I don't mean like D&D worlds, I mean like actual Earth worlds, they went to some version of Earth where they piloted giant mechs and fought giant kaiju, Pacific Rim style. But that was a lot of fun, and all my players, when I was at the end of the campaign, we were talking about all of the things they liked the best. That and a few other things. There's like 2 or 3 things that pretty much everybody mentioned, but Pacific Rim was one of them. And, you know, I'm just saying, you can have some cool fun with some of that kind of stuff, you know? Don't be afraid to go crazy and be creative. Number 3, I'm just calling this one Upset in the Natural Balance. And I have an example. This was from a game that a friend of mine ran a long, long time ago. His name was Chris, and Chris was an amazing game master. He had some of the most interesting and creative ideas in any game system I've ever been in. And probably the best of them all was a game that he just called The Circle. And the basic idea was all of us made our characters, and we essentially, it wasn't even really a D&D campaign, it was just more like whatever we wanted it to be. But basically we all made characters from whatever realm. The only thing was, each of us had something that was different or like supernatural, some sort of specific power that other people of our world didn't necessarily have, right? And each of us was chosen by a different god, it turned out, and was taken from our world of origin to the world of the Circle. And it turned out that the sun god had actually died, and with the death of the sun god, the sun itself was now starting to slowly fade out and die. And so the gods decided, we're just going to each pick a champion. These champions are going to have like a giant battle royale, essentially, using the world as their stage. And whoever wins, we're going to turn that guy into the new sun god. And what was interesting is we were all separated to different areas. It had a very Wheel of Time type of feel as well, because my friend and I were both big Wheel of Time fans. The books were like, I think we were on book 5 or so at the point where this had all happened, right? But the idea was we'd each start in different corners of the world. We were each the champion of a different god who'd chosen us because we had some sort of special power. And, you know, he kind of matched us up with whichever deity he thought we would be, you know, most aligned with, probably. And we were each placed into like important places of honor within the religious institutions of that world. So our campaign, it was kind of weird because we had a really good group of players because we were never really together. And I think that for some campaigns that could be difficult, where it was basically like your turn, 15, 20 minutes, next guy, his turn, 15, 20 minutes. But the thing is, it was so good, and all the characters were so interesting, and we were so engaged, not just in our own stories, but in each other's stories, that it never really dragged, even though like 3/4 of the night you'd be like watching everybody else play and not even really having like your turn. But it was great. Like, I know that could be rough for some groups, and you know, if your guys just only like rolling dice for combat pretty much, that's probably not going to fly. But if you have a group that you think would be cool with this kind of thing, then it was excellent. But by the way, you don't have to go the PvP route. He did, because he knew that he had players who weren't going to just immediately start killing each other the moment we saw each other. And really, none of us really met up. But eventually, it was kind of like what we talked about in Campaign Idea 1. We kind of figured out that the real problem isn't the war between all the players and stuff. The real problem is that the sun is dying. And there was no real indication that this was ever going to be actually fixed by one of us winning the championship. Especially because we started to figure out things like other gods that were long forgotten had started returning to the world. And those gods seemed way more powerful than the current group of gods. Mostly it turned out that the new gods weren't actually gods at all. They were just these like immortal science researcher guys who started getting worshipped because they never grew old or died. And after being alive for tens and hundreds of thousands of years, kind of started to believe their own hype. So there was no indication. We never finished the game, unfortunately. Oh, I really wish we had. But there was no indication at the point where we left off that the gods that had chosen us even had the ability to make us a god, or that the sun's dying was even connected to the death of the sun god. Like, it started to look, and maybe we were jumping to assumptions because we never knew for sure, that he might have just figured out the sun was dying and killed himself. Like, we don't know if it was chicken or the egg, you know what I mean? And if the world was super old, it's possible the sun was just dying on its own anyway, and none of these idiots who are running around calling themselves gods even knew until that happened. And they're like, hey, the sun god's dead. I wonder if that's going to have problems. Oh no, it looks like the sun's dying. It might have been dying for thousands of years. We don't know. Either way, it was a fascinating concept, but I wanted to mention some other ideas as well. One of those could be something like Yggdrasil, the world tree, is dying, and players need to resolve that, right? Maybe the god of death has disappeared, which I think would be an interesting idea, and now suddenly nothing is dying, which at first might sound great, but death is part of the natural order, and I think that a campaign to try to find who's abducted or maybe even murdered the god of death could be really interesting. I think that'd be a fascinating scenario. Either way, the main idea is something has changed in the natural order. Heroes have to restore it. Maybe they're chosen by gods, maybe they're chosen by somebody else, whatever, right? Number 4, and this was the idea that I took from Enter the Dungeons channel, and this is called The Project. I believe he was heavily inspired by Oppenheimer, it sounds like, the movie. But the main idea is the players are all chosen by some government group working for some king or emperor or whatever, and it's like a secret cabal group, and the players are working directly for these guys. They're under orders not to talk to any of the normal civilians or whatever, and maybe they even be watched by the group. I like the idea of things seeming fairly normal at the beginning, but they slowly start to increase the level of suspension tension, and you start to cast doubt on the aspirations of the project itself, right? So maybe at low levels the players have to retrieve some items or whatever they need to build the project. And maybe the project ends up being a super powerful weapon. Maybe it ends up being, this is one of his ideas, some sort of eldritch god that the government is trying to bring back because they're stupid enough to think they can control it and want to use it as a weapon. But of course, this is a terrible idea, and the players should be able to do missions at the beginning where they're just following orders and doing the work for the project. But as things go on, they start to become suspicious. Why are we doing this? Some of this isn't starting to add up. There's clearly something going on here. And as they begin to look into it, they maybe start to discover what the true nature of the project really is. And maybe even awaken an elder god or, whatever else. Demon lord, whatever you want to use, right? Personally, I thought that was a fascinating idea. And I really like the idea of it. And then finally, this is basically the post-apocalypse. And I kind of pictured something like Dark Sun, but more directly involved the players, right? If anybody ever read the comic Fables, which was basically from DC, but it was under their independent line back then, right? Basically, the idea is that all the fairy tales are real and exist somewhere out there in the multiverse, right? But then this person called the Adversary starts conquering all the fable worlds and assimilating them all into his empire, right? And so all these, Snow White and the Big Bad Wolf, the Three Little Pigs, etc., they all start getting Cinderella. They all start getting driven from their natural fables homelands and end up fleeing and find themselves in new worlds, including, of course, Earth is one of them. But the idea that basically being the characters are forced out of whatever their home realm was, they come to a new realm, or the world is conquered by the villain, and the players start out being refugees now having to survive this post-apocalyptic world, but also where there's an ultimate end villain in mind, where eventually maybe the players could even try to fight and defeat him and free the world, and maybe nature can heal itself, kind of thing, right? And I like that kind of idea a lot because it takes away a lot of the usual towns and empires and kingdoms and stuff. There's probably not going to be some magic shop the players can just go to, right? It's probably going to be a world that's devastated by, powerful forces of magic or whatever else, right? And this is why I make the Dark Sun comparison. And I kind of like that idea for a setting a lot, especially though when there's some big uber villain at the end, the adversary of their campaign, so to speak. and that the players can maybe one day hope to like level up enough and get the stuff they need to maybe even bring him down and try to, you know, restore the balance of the world again, right? And I think that each one of those is a pretty fascinating idea for a campaign. I remember I once was doing research for a campaign, which I never ended up running, and I never finished designing the world, which is probably why I never ran it. But basically, it was going to be this world where the surface was uninhabitable and everybody lived beneath the surface. So it was going to be kind of like an Underdark style, but more bleak, more depressing, and with really no surface world to go back to, you know? And the idea there was going to be kind of the same thing, that something crazy to happen to the planet, maybe like magical storms or something along those lines. And now everything was underground, and of course there were different factions, and some of them were starting to fight against each other. And, you know, you had like all your humans and elves and everybody else who used to be surface dwellers who'd now been forced underneath. You had people like the dwarves that were always underneath and were generally kind of friendly with some of these forces. They're not like evil per se, but are also kind of uncomfortable with all these other races suddenly being forced underground into like their domain, you know? And then of course you've got the drow and other underground races that are, you know, more evil historically. I know Wizards of the Coast doesn't like anybody to be inherently evil these days, but personally I still find that to be a useful setting. And then you can have like different conflicts based on that, and I find that the more like confined type of setting where players can't just like retreat back up to the surface world to be interesting. I like the idea of taking away a lot of the comforts of typical D&D campaigns where the players can like, we're going to go to the magic shop and buy whatever. We're going to, you know, come back and the city guard can help us with this or that or whatever, right? Once you start breaking down all these systems of order, then the players are left a lot more to their own devices and have to sort of struggle through things a lot more. However, I also think it gives the players, if they're clever or intelligent or ambitious, opportunities to really kind of take the campaign in interesting ideas. Maybe the players don't want to be heroes. Maybe they want to be a bunch of mercenary lords or something like that, right? And in these kind of broken down, dysfunctional types of worlds, that becomes very, very possible. And really, I don't mind that idea at all. I don't care if my players want to take over a kingdom and make it their own, right? I've done like Players Save the World campaigns a bunch of times. Let's try this. That sounds kind of cool, right? And so really, to me, a setting should give you a good basis of where to start. It should give you a feel or like an atmosphere for the campaign. It should give you a lot of different branches where things can go. But you also need to see what your players are responding to. I am personally a big fan of like political campaigns, but the current group I have aren't super big on political campaigns at all. So I tend to introduce some of those elements, but I don't tend to make them the focus of a campaign because I just know my players aren't into that. I read the book Shogun when I was younger. I bring that up because the Shogun miniseries has just started and I watched the first 2 episodes. And so far it's been pretty faithful to the book, which is nice to see. But that was like one of the first books I'd ever read where it just like blew my mind. Now, partly because I was much younger, right? I was like probably 20 or 25 or whatever it was instead of, you know, mid-50s, right? I've read a lot more, you know, political type stuff since then. But that was like the first book I really read where I really discovered things like unreliable narrators and, you know, constantly shifting alliances. And it was so fascinating. The main character is like this English ship pilot who crash lands in Japan, right? But he ends up in the service of this one samurai lord, Lord Toranaga. And Toranaga is just a brilliant, brilliant individual. And 80% of what he tells people, you never know if you can trust it or not. Because things that he'll say, that he'll give all the reasons, and it sounds so perfect and so logical, and everybody else in the story is like, oh yeah, that must be what he's doing. That makes perfect sense. Only to discover that it's all lies. That his true purpose is something completely different. And sometimes he's even like sabotaging his own plans so that his enemies won't like sabotage him even worse, kind of thing. Where, you know, where, because he knows if he gains too much power too quickly, that they'll move against him. But his own people want to see like him like progressing and moving towards the goals, right? And so he's kind of balancing this like tightrope where he's always trying to like get more power and then show that he doesn't really have power, and, you know, constantly deflect attention away from himself to other things. Or like I said, he'll like do something and then he'll like partly sabotage his own plans, so it'll be a partial success, but then his people are still like, well, you know, at least we got this, you know, and then he'll be like, yeah, but now we can do this and this and this, and we can just build on it. And they're like, yeah, great idea. And then he like sabotages his own plans there too, partly, and like, it just never ends. But it was so intriguing. And like I said, I personally love that kind of stuff. But I know what players really don't really care for it a lot, right? A couple of them do, but a couple of them just really start tuning out as soon as there's, you know, they just want you to roll initiative and start attacking stuff. And I think the most important thing of any campaign is to be able to make it enjoyable for the players. So if I just ran nothing but high political campaigns and my players don't care about those, they're never really going to be fully invested in the campaign. Now, maybe I can find like a couple of those elements, and if my players are responding to them, then I can go into it more, which makes me happy, right? But the thing is that I need to see what the players are liking, and that's why I mentioned all the branches. You know, I want to have as many branches as possible, and then players are going to like pick this and this and this and this, and then I can just kind of not really deal with the rest. And I've mentioned this before too. I like to have notes on different places, and one of the best pieces of advice I ever got on world building, I think it was from Dragon magazine back in the day. I don't remember for sure. But it said, for every place on your map, have a secret associated with that place. And then you're never really at a complete loss. If the player's like, we want to go there. And then you're like, ah, crap, I don't got anything for that place. I don't even know what's there. Well, now you're kind of screwed. You're like having to try to think on the fly. Maybe it fits, maybe it doesn't. Maybe you're trying to think about how to re-steer the players back to what you wanted. Or you could just have like a couple pages of notes with like maybe a sentence or two, or maybe a paragraph on the place. And then when the players are like, I want to go there. And you're like, crap, what's over there? Oh, okay, we got this going on over there. Oh yeah, the priest of the town is actually like a vampire, and he's been slowly trying to like turn like the village elders and stuff. Well, that could be kind of cool, you know. Or maybe there's like some sort of magical ritual. Oh, actually, that would be a great idea. Combine that with like 30 days a night and do like a, you know, month-long total darkness fighting undead campaign. That could be a lot of fun. Again, steal stuff from other things you like, you know. Never be afraid to do that. You could do 30 days of daylight. Maybe that'd be a different, less scary, but could still be interesting, you know. Anyways, the point is, if I have something written down, even if it's just a sentence or two, then no matter what the players want to do or where they want to go, I will have something that is there where I can read it and think, oh yeah, I have this going on there. And then I can start thinking, how do I want that to relate? Or maybe, you know, like if I'm pre-planning everything in like minute detail, just pages and pages of notes on places the players are never going to go, that's a wasted effort. But on the places where they do go, sometimes I'm not able to react to previous events in the campaign. Whereas so if I'm like, oh, there was this thing here with this like secret cult or whatever, right? And then I'm like, oh wait, but the players found like that one artifact and they seemed really interested in like the symbols and stuff. Maybe I put some of those same symbols here and I tie that into the cult, and then it like all ties everything together. Well, if I didn't think of that in advance, that's probably not going to happen. But because I'm like, yeah, there's a cult here, and then it's like, wait a minute, how do I bring this back together and make a cohesive whole? So anyways, that's my advice for you. Make a setting, have it be interesting, maybe take the players a little outside their comfort zone. That's why I talk about disorder and breaking down established comforts for the players, but also give the players room to go in whatever direction they want and just be willing to roll with it. And, you know, if you have a few notes on stuff, that can make the whole process a lot easier. So anyways, that's my video. Thank you for watching. If feel free to like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and most importantly, leave me your comments in the comments section. I read every single comment, even if I don't necessarily respond to all of them, but I do read them all, I promise. So thank you, and I'll see you next time. Bye.